What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here with a new daily video. All of the stories therein are new to this channel as well as I can keep track of. So if you guys end up enjoying this video and you guys are enjoying these daily videos, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. It really helps the video to do well and ensures I can keep making these videos daily for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts you'd like to share in the comments, either about the stories or the video itself, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about doing this is reading your guys' comments, even if I may not always be able to respond to them. Either way, I'm gonna let you guys enjoy the next hour or so of true scary stories, and I'll see you again at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. There's a local dollar store in my neighborhood that's pretty close to my apartment. It's closer to my place than any other stores like Target, Walmart, or the grocery store. Because of that, I used to go there basically all the time. I would say I was there twice a week at least just to get whatever I needed. I would take a 2 to 3 minute drive to there from my place. The store was like most dollar stores and was somewhat small. It wasn't usually that busy either, which was also nice. One evening, I went to the dollar store to grab a few things. I walked inside, and like normal, it wasn't that busy. There were just a few people in there, and they were shopping throughout the store. I began looking for the first thing I was going to buy, when suddenly a woman approached me out of nowhere. This woman had dark hair and was quite short. She was wearing glasses and a black coat. After approaching me, she said she saw me here all the time. I said that yes, I did shop here quite a bit. The woman then described the things I would usually buy and said how she always saw me get the off-brand Gatorade and one particular brand of chips that I really liked. This was kind of weird to me. I mean, how close had she been watching me to memorize all this stuff about me? Why did she even come over to say this in the first place? I said yes and tried to laugh it off. The conversation ended abruptly, with the woman saying she would see me later. I then walked away and continued with my shopping. I didn't see the lady until almost the end of my shopping trip. When I was almost done, I remember I was in an aisle when I happened to look up randomly. I saw the woman walking by, filming me with her phone. She was trying to hide it, but doing a terrible job. I could see her phone was pointed right at me. The woman didn't even look at me and walked past. She began to pretend to look at a product on a shelf about 20 feet away from me. Even though she was looking at some items and not in my direction, she kept her phone facing me the entire time. I was so confused. I thought about confronting her, but instead I decided to just check out and leave. When I started walking away, I saw the woman angle her phone to keep it on me. When I looked over, she quickly moved it away once more. I really wanted to confront her now, but I decided not to. As weird as this was, who knew what would happen if I confronted her directly? As long as something like this didn't happen again, then I wouldn't try to pay it too much mind. I headed up and paid for my items, then left the store. The woman didn't follow me or anything. She stayed inside when I left. After getting out of the dollar store, I headed back home. It was about 2 or 3 days later now. I had gone to the store again. I had sort of forgotten about that woman. This time that I shopped there, I don't remember noticing her at all. The next time I was there, she was right back again. This was roughly a week after our last interaction. It was a little bit later at night, and the dollar store was even more quiet than before. I did not see the lady as I walked in. I was going around the store getting some items I wanted to buy. When I was sort of near the front end of the store, though, I noticed something out of the front windows. The windows looked out to the parking lot, and you could see a good amount of it. There were maybe 3 or 4 cars in the entire lot, but I could see the same woman from before, standing next to my car. She appeared to be either filming it or taking photos of the outside. She also recorded my license plates. When I saw this, I decided to leave. I checked out and kept an eye on the woman the whole time. I watched her as she tried to open one of the doors to my car. Luckily, I'd locked it. As soon as I made it out of the doors, I saw the woman immediately duck behind another nearby car in the parking lot. When I reached my vehicle, I called out to her, asking her what the hell she was doing. I got no response. I knew the woman was still hiding behind that car, but she was not answering me. I didn't figure it would be a good idea to approach her or stick around to say anything else. I just climbed into my car and drove home. I decided after that it would probably be smart not to go back to that store for quite a while, and I haven't been back since then. That was about 6 months ago, and I've not seen that lady again at all. I'm hoping I never do. I live by myself in an apartment. I have a one-bedroom place on the second floor of my building, and I've lived here now for about 2 years or so. The creepiest thing to ever happen to me took place just a couple of months ago. I had gotten home from work several hours earlier. After making some food and eating, I was relaxing on the couch and watching some TV. My living room is at the back end of this apartment, and the front half is mostly the kitchen space. That's also where the front door is. It was sometime at night. I don't recall exactly what time. All I know is that it was very dark outside. All of a sudden, everything went pitch black. The power had just gone out. It was really strange, and I didn't know why this could have possibly happened. I got up and looked out the window. It wasn't even raining. I wasn't really sure why the power had gone out. The only time it had ever gone out before was during a really bad storm. That had only happened the one time. I didn't even own a flashlight, so I had to use the one on my phone. I walked over to the small closet that had all the fuses and stuff. I had no idea what I was doing, however. I just turned around and left. I knew that I wasn't overloading any of the outlets or anything. I figured something must have happened with the power in the area. I went out onto my balcony and looked around. I noticed that the lights in other people's units appeared to be off as well. The whole building must have just lost power. Why, though, I didn't know. I went back over to the couch and sat down. I went on YouTube with my phone and started watching some videos. All of a sudden, there was a knock at the front door of my apartment. It wasn't a very loud knocking noise. In fact, it was pretty quiet. I could barely even hear it. I paused the video and looked over to the door. I didn't know what it could possibly be. I was going to get up and check, but following the knocking sounds, there was this ominous laughter. It was the sound of a man laughing in the creepiest way imaginable. When I heard that, I stopped. I no longer wanted to get up and see who was there. After a few seconds of nothing, the man outside began to knock once more. He began to laugh again as well. I ignored it. I didn't really know what was going on, but after the second knock followed by laughter, I knew I didn't want to have anything to do with this guy. I didn't hear anything else for a short while. I think the guy must have walked away. After that, things were pretty quiet. I sat down on my couch and went back to watching YouTube. I tried to forget about the whole thing. A while later, though, the man returned. There was once again a lone knocking on the door, followed by his creepy and unsettling laughter. This time, I decided to get up and actually see who the heck was there. As creeped out as I was also curious as to who was doing this and why. My eyes had adjusted pretty well to the darkness at this point, but it was still extremely hard to see. I used my phone to guide my way toward the front door. When I got there, I looked out the peephole. I noticed the backup lights had gone on in the hallway. Whenever the power went out, there were these other lights out in the hallway that would turn on. To my surprise, nobody was at my door. I opened up my front door and looked down the hallway. I took a couple steps outside, and when I did, I saw there was a man standing about 50 feet away, facing the other direction. He was a much larger man, who I didn't recognize at all. The instant he heard my door open, he turned around and began sprinting in my direction. The man ran nearly all the way to my door before I managed to get it closed again. He began to knock on it, and this time he laughed an exaggerated and loud laugh. Finally, he left. I stopped hearing any more knocking after that. About an hour later, the power came back on. The guy luckily did not return. The next day, I was on the internet portal site of the apartment complex. I saw on there that several other residents had complained about the strange knocking and laughter. Apparently, I wasn't the only one dealing with this guy. Thing is, nobody figured out who he was or how he got inside the building. He certainly did not live there, though. This story takes place many years ago when I was camping alone out in California. I haven't gone camping in many years now, but when I was younger, I would go on many weekend camping trips to get out in nature by myself and relax. I did these camping trips quite frequently, almost every other weekend it felt like. I loved being out in nature, but I did not like the discomfort of sleeping on the ground in a tent. For how often I went camping, it made sense for me to purchase a small little camper that would attach and part from the bed of my truck. It was really nice and could comfortably fit me and even one more if I needed. One of my trips, I drove about 5 hours away from my house to a beautiful area I hadn't been before. I spent the day doing a long hike and then cooling off in a peaceful lake during the evening. By nighttime, I had parked my truck in a quiet, remote area, sort of up a mountain so I could get a nice view when I woke up in the morning. I was still up, though, reading a book by flashlight, when I heard footsteps outside and someone approaching my truck. Normally, I don't ever have people walking anywhere near my vehicle, so it was odd to hear for sure. Maybe I had parked in a bad spot, or somewhere I wasn't technically allowed to be, and somebody was coming to let me know. Either way, I didn't feel comfortable, especially since it was after dark now. I called out a greeting to whoever this was. "Hello? Who's there?" The footsteps approached closer, and a raspy male voice responded. "Hi there, I just wanted to check out your camper. Pretty nifty, huh?" I was really quite comfortable laying in my bed in the camper in the back of the truck, so I yelled out that I could show them in the morning, assuming they were someone who was camping nearby. There was no response from the man outside for what felt like a couple of minutes. Finally, I began to make out him muttering something to himself, but I couldn't really understand any of what he was saying. Assuming that would be that, I went back to reading. Oddly enough, I did not hear any footsteps retreating away. The man still had to be standing there, and he was. After a few moments, I heard footsteps moving around my truck but still not leaving. There were tiny little porthole-like windows on the side of my camper, which I kept covered with curtains at night. I looked out, but I couldn't see this man at all. It sounded like he'd walked to the front of my truck. Next thing I know, I heard some quiet thumps starting from the hood and eventually getting closer to me. Whoever this person was, they had the audacity to climb onto my vehicle and crawl onto the roof of my truck toward the camper. I was a person who took very good care of my truck, and this guy was really pissing me off to say the least. I shouted out, alerting the person I had a gun with me, and if they didn't get off and leave, I was going to come out and blast them. I heard the man get off my vehicle and walk away a bit. I still didn't hear their footsteps fade away, as they would have if they had completely left. I got out of my camper with the firearm and my flashlight. Upon pointing the flashlight around me, I saw the man crouching down near a bush about 40 feet away. As the flashlight illuminated him, he backed away further into the darkness. I had enough with whoever this person was. At this point, I didn't know if it was somebody who had gone on drugs or somebody even crazier, but I yelled at him to leave and not come back. I was already up at this point and was driving back home in the morning anyway. I packed up all my stuff and headed home early. Whether it be due to scary encounters such as this or something animal-related, I always carry a firearm on me when I go camping. I'm thankful I had it on me that night. I work at the small perfume store in a large mall. This mall has literally hundreds of stores inside of it, and the store that I work at is one of the smaller ones. It only requires one employee at a time. We sell all kinds of perfumes, as well as a few skin products. Our store is open until the time the mall closes, which is 8 p.m. One time, I was working at the store until 8 o'clock. I would be all by myself for the shift. Normally, the store was pretty quiet. Sometimes, if the mall was really busy, we'd get a lot of customers, but usually there were not that many people in the store at once. I was sitting behind the counter, which faced directly to the entrance, and a large window on the other side of the entrance doors. The day went by as usual for the most part. We got some customers here and there, but it was mostly quiet. At around 5 or 6, though, something really strange happened. I remember that nobody was in the store at that particular time. I was just sitting behind the counter when I noticed this man walking past the store. He was wearing this really creepy-looking mask. Not quite a clown mask, but it looked sort of similar. He then turned and looked into the window right at me. He pressed his face up against the glass. It was quite creepy, but I figured it to be a joke and laughed it off. The man stayed at the window for an uncomfortable amount of time, over a minute. Then he finally stopped and walked a distance away. Before he passed by the store completely, though, he stopped again and looked in once more. He stared for a little while before turning and walking away. Extremely weird. Over the next hour or so, I got a few more customers, and we made a few sales. People would walk past the shop down the mall hallway all the time, but the later it got, the quieter it became. At around 7 o'clock, I saw the strange man yet again. He walked past the shop once more and did not stop. He did turn around to look at me as he passed by, though. It was very interesting, for a lack of a better word. I didn't really know what this guy was doing. Why was he just walking all around the mall? I figured he was probably messing with a lot of people, trying to get a reaction out of them. I didn't see the man for the rest of the time that we were open. At 8 o'clock, I went over to the entrance and closed our glass doors, then locked them up. After that, I just had to finish up by doing a few things. Then I could leave for the night. I went back to the counter and would be able to leave in probably 5 minutes. As I was behind the counter, though, I saw the man had returned. The same guy still wearing his creepy mask. He stopped right in front of the 2 doors and started to stare at me. Then he rushed up to them and tried to open them, but they were locked. After that, he started to walk away. I figured that he was leaving the mall. After all, it was now closed, and no stores would be open anymore. The man did not go out of my sight, though. Instead, when he reached the end, he turned around and walked back, then started pacing back and forth in front of the shop and looking in at me. Almost the entire time, I tried my best to ignore him. Soon, though, I was done with work, and I wanted to leave. Thing is, I couldn't exactly leave with this guy out there waiting for me. I was hoping he would just go away on his own, but he didn't after several more minutes. I was starting to get impatient. I hoped one of the mall's security guards would see him and tell him he had to go. By now, he was probably one of the last people left, if not the very last one. He continued to stand around and look at me. Every so often, sometimes he would pace around a little more, but he would never move out of my line of sight. It was like he was just waiting for me to leave. He seemed to know that I was off now, but I wasn't going to leave with this guy out there. I didn't know who he was or what he was capable of. Before, I figured him to be harmless, but now I wasn't quite so sure. This went on for quite a while, when finally I saw one of the mall security guards come into my view in front of the store. He started speaking to the man. I couldn't really hear what was being said exactly. I could just really hear their voices. All I could really make out was their voices. Not long at all after they started speaking, the masked man walked away and out of sight. The security guard followed. There was not too much of an interaction. Most likely, the guard had just told him the mall was closed and he had to leave. Still, I waited a couple of minutes and made sure the guy didn't return. Then, I was finally able to leave the store. I walked the now empty hallways of the mall and out to my car in the parking lot. When I got outside and into the lot, I remember looking to my left. One of the first things I noticed was that the masked man was right there. He was just sort of standing, around 100 feet away. He was near another set of entrance doors, standing on the sidewalk out front. I hoped he would not look over and see me. I walked as fast as I could to get to my car, and I was able to get there okay. I quickly left. When I did, I saw the guy still waiting in the parking lot. I don't know if he was waiting for me to leave or what. Maybe he thought I was going to exit out those other doors. Either way, I'm glad I was able to get out safely and make it back home. After that, I never saw the guy again. I still sometimes wonder what his plans were. This happened to me many years ago in a neighborhood that I used to live in. I lived in a quiet neighborhood in a very hilly area. It was a very nice place to live. There were a lot of winding roads with big houses and large yards. I'm guessing a lot of the houses in the area were built by the same company because most of them were quite similar. The basement of the houses was actually on ground level, and the main floor and upper levels of the house were above that. All the houses had a big set of stairs attached, so to access the main floor, you wouldn't have to go through the basement area of your home. Due to the fact that the basements were on the ground level, many people had sliding doors in their basements that would lead out into the backyard. The reason for the in-depth description of the layout of these houses is because this is also how my house was built. The last summer that I spent living in that neighborhood, there occurred a series of break-ins in people's homes, my house included. The night my house was broken into, I wasn't there at the time, but a couple of items were taken from my basement, including a bike I kept down there. Later that summer, on one of my evening walks, I was shocked to see a younger man riding towards me on what appeared to be my own bike. I figured this guy must have purchased the bike from the person who'd stolen it, and I could get some information on the culprit who was breaking into all our basements. I flagged down the guy on the bike. As he approached, I indicated that I wanted to talk to him. Upon me mentioning that the bike was mine and that I was interested in who he'd bought it from, the young man suddenly appeared very uncomfortable. Instantly, I realized this was perhaps the guy who had stolen my bike and broken into the basement in the first place. Before he could begin pedaling away, I grabbed a firm hold of the handlebars to stop him. My suspicions were further confirmed when the man jumped off my bike. To my surprise, he pulled out a small knife or switchblade. Full of fear at the sudden escalation of the situation, I quickly hopped onto my own bike and put some distance between us, biking down the street. The young man began to come after me as though he was going to chase me, but it seemed he thought better of it. Maybe he thought he couldn't catch up to me. He began to run away. I biked home and notified the cops immediately of the young man and what he looked like. I alerted our neighborhood group chat as well and gave a brief description of him. The cops never did end up finding him or identifying who he was. Nobody in our neighborhood ended up seeing him again or having another basement broken into. None of them knew who he was either. I was always nervous that I might run into the violent man again someday. It ended up being a very frightful encounter on the street, but it was nice to get my bike back. This is something that happened a couple of years ago. One of my good friends is a guy named Drew. We grew up together and had been friends since we were kids. At the time of this story, Drew had just recently gotten married to his wife Jennifer. I remember that after they got married, they bought this house a little bit out in the country. It wasn't really that far away, maybe about 20 to 30 minutes, but it was a bit further away from the city than I had ever lived. Same with Drew. Both of us grew up in a much more populated area. They wanted more space, and the property was really big though. Much of it was wooded. I remember shortly after moving there, Drew invited me out to his place to come and check it out. When I got there, I was very impressed. They still had to get much more furniture because it was a much bigger house than the apartment they'd had before. The yard was especially cool though, because the house was not even that close to any neighbors at all. The woods were so large. There had been some paths in the woods, but they hadn't been maintained in many years. Because of this, some of the paths were okay, and some were completely overgrown with tall grass and other plants and things. Drew wanted to show me the woods as well, so we walked out there. He said his plan was to buy a couple four-wheelers and restore the paths himself. Then he could drive them through the woods. It seemed cool to me. We went out to investigate the shape of the paths and mark off some points that had to be cleared. We ended up going pretty far out. I didn't realize just how big the woods were. We had been walking for quite a while, and the paths around this point were very covered up. That's when I first noticed that somebody else was out there as well. I just remember randomly looking over to the left when a far distance away, I saw a man. This man was seemingly just walking through the middle of the forest. It was a really odd sight. I asked Drew if there were any neighbors' properties close by, and he said no. Their property was the only one on the street with large woods. I told him that I'd just seen a man walking a distance away. By now, the guy was already out of sight. I had only seen him for a moment before he was not in view anymore. Drew said that nobody should be out here, and this was his land. He was 100% sure of that. We walked a little ways back to try and see where the man had gone, but we had no luck. The guy was so far away, and there were so many things in between us. Drew called out asking if anybody was there, but got no response. We both hoped that maybe it was just a neighbor who for some reason had wandered onto Drew's property. Honestly, we had no clue, but we knew the guy was not supposed to be there. I thought the guy would leave when he realized we were out there in the woods. We continued to find the path locations, and were marking them off by sticking markers into the ground. About 20 minutes later, we walked around this corner and heard a noise from behind us. We both looked back and saw the man. He crossed the path from one of the wooded parts to another. He was about 100 feet away. We saw him as he quickly darted out and disappeared back into the dense woods. Drew yelled at him though, and we both started going in his direction. Drew yelled that this was private property, and the man had to leave. We got to the location on the path where the man had crossed, and we looked into the woods where he had gone. The man never replied to Drew, and we no longer saw or heard any sign of him. He would have enough time to be a good distance away by now. Drew yelled one more thing, saying that if he saw him again, he was calling the cops. After that, we continued on still. By this point, we were both very suspicious of seeing the man. We wrapped up and decided to go back to Drew's house. We were at least a 15-minute walk from getting out of the woods. About 10 minutes later, we were maybe 5 minutes from being out of the woods. There was another noise behind us. We looked back, and the man was there again. This time he came out of the woods and onto the path and began moving towards us. Drew and I just took off running for some reason. I just had a feeling this guy was dangerous. Clearly he was not listening and not bothered with the threat of the police. We ran all the way out of the woods and into the rest of Drew's yard. We then went inside, and Drew called the cops. When the cops got out to his property, they searched a little bit of the woods. However, the man was never found. Somehow, he was able to elude the police. I went home after that, and was honestly glad that I didn't live there. I kept up with Drew, and he updated me on some things. He said the man never returned, at least not as far as he was aware of. Drew still lives there with Jennifer, and I've been to their house several times. He was able to complete the paths for his four-wheelers in the woods. Luckily, he's not seen the man at all. We never found out who the guy was, or what he was doing there in the first place. Back when I was in college, I signed up to be a DoorDasher. I was able to make a fair amount of money doing this after classes, and I didn't have any other job. So I went DoorDashing quite a bit. One night during a snowstorm, it was peak hours. I would be getting even more money for delivering during this storm, because nobody would want to leave their home to get food that evening. I was getting a ton of orders back to back to back. I was making so much money, and the roads weren't that bad yet. I just kept taking order after order after order. I had begun to run towards empty for gas in my car, but the money was still rolling in. I felt like I could scrape in one more order before filling up at a gas station and heading home for the night. I proceeded to Panera Bread, which was the restaurant I was picking up from for my last order. I got in and out of there right before they closed at 9 o'clock. However, when I went back to my vehicle, it would not start. It appeared I'd actually pushed the gas tank a little too far and run out altogether. I called my friend and roommate Christian, telling him about the situation I was in. He was going to help me out by filling a small container at the gas station, then driving it over to my location so I could start up my car again, finish the order, and then head home. As I was waiting for Christian to arrive with the gas canister, I was just hanging out on my phone. All the workers had left by now, and I was too focused on my phone to notice that another car had pulled into the lot. I didn't notice this car until it was pulling into the space right next to me. My friend Christian drove an SUV, so I was surprised to look up and see this was a white four-door sedan. The front seats were occupied by two middle-aged men, each one of them bundled up in a thick winter jacket. The driver's side window rolled down, and they indicated that they wanted to talk to me, motioning for me to roll down my own window. I rolled down my passenger window just a crack, so I could hear what they were saying. The man in the driver's seat called out to me, "Hey, what's going on? Everything all right here?" I replied, telling them about how my car had run out of gas, but my friend was on his way and I didn't need any help at the moment. The men told me that they just wanted to make sure everything was all right. They rolled up their window and talked to each other for a few seconds more, then left the parking lot, disappearing into the snowstorm. My friend Christian arrived shortly after, and I was able to get enough gas in my tank to allow me to finish my DoorDashing. It was getting really late, and I needed to finish my order and get home, since I had 8 a.m. class the next morning. As I was driving to the address for the Panera Bread order, I picked up that a car was now following my every turn. It appeared to be the very same white sedan from the Panera Bread parking lot, trailing me about a block back or so. I continued to the address and delivered the DoorDash order, apologizing for my tardiness. I explained that I had run out of gas. As I walked down the sidewalk towards my vehicle, I glanced down the street. The white sedan was now parked on the road. Once again, it was about a block behind me. I hadn't told the two men in the car that I was DoorDashing, so they must have thought this was the house where I lived. Figuring I would try to take advantage of that, I quickly jumped back in my car and sped away. In my rear-view mirror, I could see them hastily pulling away from the curb. I definitely surprised them and gotten a good head start. I took the long way home, with a ton of turns I had to drive pretty fast through to ensure that I would stay ahead of them and lose them. I drove pretty recklessly, honestly, drifting around corners in this snowstorm. I did end up shaking them off me, and once I got home, I kept looking out my window to ensure their car was not parked anywhere on my street. I never did end up seeing that white sedan again. I'll never know what their exact motive was. For the rest of the time I spent door dashing during school, I always made sure I had enough gas left to finish the deliveries and get home. I didn't want to end up in a situation like that again. I remember back in my junior year of high school, we went on a field trip for one of my classes. This was a field trip that took up 2 entire school days. We had gone to an amusement park for a science class, which was a lot of fun. I also missed a test for another one of my classes, but luckily my teacher was cool and let me make it up. We scheduled the time after school the next day for me to make up the test. It was for Spanish class, and the classroom was toward the end of one hallway in the north side of the building. When I got out of school, I walked over to the Spanish classrooms. My teacher, Mr. Jordan, was in the classroom with a couple of other students there as well. I'm not sure exactly what the other students were doing there. May have been making up an assignment or something. Mr. Jordan handed me the test when I got there and told me I could take the test in another room. He said the students were going to be talking to him and he didn't want them to distract me. He grabbed a key to a nearby Spanish classroom and said I could take the test in there by myself. We walked over to the classroom. The teacher was already gone for the day for that one. Mr. Jordan told me he would be in his room if I needed anything, then wished me good luck and left. I sat down at a random desk and started the exam. Spanish was a class I was pretty decent at, but I wasn't expecting to ace the test or anything. As I went on, things were going really well. I was feeling confident about my answers. When I was almost done, though, I suddenly heard the school was having a lockdown. Of course, this was quite strange, partially because it was after school hours. I didn't even know that schools could have lockdowns when school wasn't in session, but I guess it does make sense. Anyway, I didn't really know what to do. I could stay there and miss A's classroom, or try to go back to Mr. Jordan's room, which was just around the corner. After debating it for a moment or two, I decided to go back to Mr. Jordan's room. I got up and left the classroom. Mr. Jordan's room was right around the corner, only 50 feet away. There was only one classroom separating the two. After I got out into the hallway, I walked over to the room. When I got there, I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I was expecting him to come over and open it up, but literally right after I tried opening it, I heard a noise right behind me. It was footsteps. Someone was emerging from around the corner just past Mrs. A's room. It was some random woman, clearly not a student or a teacher. She looked real messed up and had this long, stringy hair. I knew immediately the lockdown must have been caused by her. The woman just started stumbling toward me. Without any more time to wait for Mr. Jordan, I started moving away further up the hallway. As I did, the woman started to walk after me. She was really creeping me out. I had no idea what she could be doing here. As I walked through the hallways, it was dead silent. Nobody else was around at all. I started moving even faster, but I could hear the woman following behind me. I turned and went down another hallway, and the woman followed still. I was continuing to move faster and faster, but the woman was doing the same. I didn't know what would happen to me if she caught up with me. I kept going down one hallway after another. The woman kept pace with me no matter what I did. I didn't want to risk stopping and trying to go to a classroom. I didn't know which teachers were still at school, and all the doors were closed as well. I kept going, and soon I made it to the front end of the school. I saw the front doors and I went for them. When I made it outside, the woman did not leave after me. She stayed inside the school instead. After that, I just ran for my car and went home. I learned later on that the woman was in fact the cause of the lockdown. I'm not sure what exactly she did, but I do know the police were called, and the school was locked down. I guess Mr. Jordan had literally been walking to the door to unlock it and let me in when I'd walked away with the woman. He let me finish the test the following day after school. I'm really glad the woman never caught up with me for whatever she was going to do. My husband and I have been living at this house for almost 5 years now. We lived in a fairly large town, but we lived right on the edge. We had a larger property in a wooded area. Our property had a cabin sort of vibe, with plenty of space for our 2 dogs, 2 German shepherds to run around. We had neighbors close to us, maybe only 500 feet away, but there were enough trees around to make it still feel secluded. On this rainy Thursday night, my husband had gone to play poker with some friends, as they occasionally did. It was at one of his buddies' houses that was about 10 minutes away. I was at home alone with the dogs, watching Netflix and enjoying some ice cream. After the episode ended, it sounded like there was a bit of a break in the rain, so I got up from the couch and let the dogs out to go to the bathroom in the backyard. I would normally go out with them and stand outside, but since it was raining lightly still, I just watched them through the window. The dogs do their business pretty quickly most of the time, but this time they were spending a lot of time sniffing and hovering around our old shed close to the woods in the backyard. My dogs began to bark at the shed and wouldn't stop doing so. Thinking that they had trapped an animal in or near the shed, I stepped out onto the back patio and yelled their names, ordering them to come back inside. The dogs would not stop barking though. I went back inside, grabbed a rain jacket and a flashlight, and put some shoes on. I walked out toward the shed to check out the scene. As I got closer, I noticed a terrible smell filling my nostrils. It smelled like a dead animal. As I approached the shed, shining my flashlight toward it, I got within about 20 feet when suddenly the door of the shed burst open and this small, dirty-looking man jumped out. He couldn't have been much taller than 5 feet. His clothes were in rags, and his hair was a tangled mess. He smelled horrible. He had a shovel from our shed in hand and took a couple of swings at my dogs, attempting to hit them. Thankfully, he missed. He locked eyes with me for a split second, then dropped the shovel and ran into the woods behind my home. After he disappeared into the woods, I ran back inside and called the cops, then called my husband, telling him to come home right away. The cops came very quickly and searched the wood area behind my house. They ended up finding the man, hiding in some brush close to my neighbor's home. My husband and I ended up finding out a couple of days later that it was a homeless man who had been squatting in people's sheds and garages around town. I'm thankful I had the dogs there with me that night, as I'm not sure what would have happened had I confronted the crazy man myself. This is something that happened when I was 11 years old. It was a warm summer day, and I was outside of our house in the front yard. I don't remember the exact time, but I would guess maybe 6 or 7 p.m. I remember there was this kid named Mikey who lived on my street. Our neighborhood was very large. There were many streets, and each of them had a bunch of houses, so there were a few kids that I was friends with who lived nearby. I remember that I saw Mikey walking down the street, and when he saw me, he waved. He approached me in the front of our yard. I remember that Mikey then told me that there was an ice cream truck in the neighborhood. Obviously, on such a hot day, I wanted to go and find some ice cream. Mikey told me to follow him, and he said it was just one street over. Mikey told me that his friend who lived on that street told him about it. I remember that we set out and started walking to the end of our street, then to go to the next one over. Well, when we got to that street, the ice cream truck was no longer there. We figured that it was just driving around. Mikey's friend was on the street and told us he thought it had gone to the next one over. We realized the truck would probably still be close by. We decided to go there after it. I remember that we went to the next street over from that, but things weren't as simple as they sounded. The neighborhood streets were not all the same. Some were a little curved or slanted. Some were also longer than others. There were also occasionally small parks and things like that. We ended up getting confused pretty easily. After not seeing the ice cream truck on the next street over, we thought it might still be close by. We kind of wandered around a couple of streets. Some were streets I had never really been down before. I kind of thought that Mikey knew where we were going, but apparently not. After walking for like 10 minutes, Mikey said we were lost, and there was no ice cream truck in sight. I said we should probably head back, and Mikey agreed. However, we no longer knew which direction was the right way to go. Naturally, we tried to just go back the way we had come from, but then we made a wrong turn somewhere. We were probably just walking in the wrong direction, and neither of us had cell phones or anything like that. After walking for what felt like a really long time, we were still not quite sure as to where we were. We never found the ice cream truck either. After coming around the corner to the next street, I noticed a kid in the front yard of one of the houses. I didn't recognize him, but Mikey did. When we saw him, Mikey shouted hello to the kid, and the kid started waving us over. We went into the front yard, and Mikey started talking to this kid. I don't really remember what about, but I was not really a part of the conversation. I was a pretty shy kid back then. The conversation continued as if I wasn't even there, and then all of a sudden the kid invited Mikey inside. They started walking away from me. I was 90% sure I was not invited to go into the house, but I didn't know what to do, so I kinda started to follow them. That's when Mikey turned to me and said, "See you later, man." That made it clear to me that I couldn't go in. They walked into the kitchen garage and went into the house through another door. I just stood there in the driveway. What I should have done is yelled at him about how he was going to just leave me here when he knew that I didn't know how to get home. I should have at least gone to the house and asked the kid's parents to call my own, but that didn't come to my mind. Instead, I walked out of the driveway and back down onto this random street. By now, the sun was actually starting to set. I was mad at Mikey and quite angry. I walked down the street for quite a while, but I still had no idea as to where I was. I kept walking down random roads, hoping to see something familiar. It slowly got darker and darker outside. I wasn't really seeing anybody else outside at all. As I walked down this one street in particular, though, I came around a corner, and this one guy stepped out from behind a parked car. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt. After I'd passed him by, I looked back and noticed him starting to follow after me. He was kind of a long ways back, but I did notice he'd walked to the end of the street when I did. When I got to the next one over, he was still there in the distance. There were about 50 feet between us. I kept walking to the end of the next street, and the man was still there. I saw something that was finally familiar to me. It was a busier street that connected to the one I lived off of. I would just have to follow that one until I got to where I needed to be. I started to walk along the sidewalk and noticed the man was still following the same distance back. I did feel a little better here, though, because cars were passing by on the road. I finally realized where I was and knew that my street was coming up on the left. As soon as I reached my street, I started sprinting as fast as I could. I didn't even bother to see if the guy walking behind me would chase after me or anything. I was able to get to my house, and then I ran inside. It felt amazing to finally be back home after that. I was really mad at Mikey. I didn't talk to him for weeks. We were never really that close of friends, but that was a terrible thing that he did. I'm happy that I was able to find my way back home that night. For a little bit of background to this story, I'm a woman, and this happened when I was 12 years old. I lived in this quiet residential neighborhood with my parents, and there was this park at the end of the street that we lived on. During the summers, almost every single morning, I would walk my dog down to the park. My dog's name was Max, and he had lots of energy. It seemed like he could run for hours without getting tired. Luckily for me, that park that we went to was usually empty, so I would let him run around for a while. Well, one morning, we went out for our walk like usual. The street was quiet. Max and I arrived at the park at the usual time. I remember that he was running around when I noticed an ice cream truck slowly going down the street. As it drove by, it stopped just in front of where the road turned. I could sort of see it between some trees. Seemed to be an odd place for an ice cream truck to stop at. I just kept my eye on it, and the truck sat there for a while. I couldn't really tell who was driving, but it didn't stop and open up to sell ice cream or anything. After that, I decided to stop looking at it. I focused my attention back on Max. A while later, though, I noticed that the truck was still there. I stayed at the park for maybe 30 minutes, and then finally went to leave. When I did, I noticed the truck was now gone. I would have had to walk sort of in front of it to go home, so I felt a bit relieved. The next day, I went back to the park at around the same time. Once again, it was just me and Max there. This time, I noticed the ice cream truck there again. It didn't stop, but drove by very slowly. After that, I didn't see it for the rest of the day. The following day, I saw it once again. I was at the park once more with Max, just like usual. This time, I saw the truck approaching, and it parked in the same spot as before. After the truck parked for a while, nothing happened. That was when I actually noticed a guy getting out of it. What happened next was very strange. He walked down the street a little and appeared to go into a neighbor's yard. After that, he disappeared completely from my sight. Several minutes later, I noticed the man again. He was entering the park I was in from the opposite side. This would have been the complete other side from the one his truck was parked on. When I saw the man, I noticed he was heading straight for me. After getting within about 20 feet, he called out to me, "Hi there!" I was sitting on a park bench and had Max on a leash. The man started asking me questions about Max and various things. He seemed fairly nice at first, but then the guy asked me if I needed a ride home. That immediately struck me as strange. Of course, I said no to him. He stayed there and continued talking to me. He said that he had a dog too, and wanted to know if I wanted to see it. I said no thanks, wondering how that would even be possible. I got up and said I had to be getting home now. We started to walk away from the man. I would have to go by his ice cream truck to get home. He started to walk after me. I didn't look behind me, but I could hear him walking. At one point, about halfway out of the park, Max turned and started barking at the guy. I didn't dare to look. We just kept going. Soon, we made it back out into the street. I heard the guy cross over and glanced back. I saw him getting into his ice cream truck. Max and I jogged the rest of the way back home and were able to make it. Moments after arriving in the front yard, I saw the ice cream truck approaching from down the street. I ran and hid behind my parents' car in the driveway. The ice cream truck drove by extremely slowly, but I was confident the man would not see me. I went inside after I was sure he wouldn't be able to notice me. After that, I took a break from walking Max in the morning. Instead, we let him run around in our backyard for exercise. Eventually, I did go back, and I never saw that man again. His ice cream truck never visited my neighborhood again either. This happened many years ago when I was still in college. I was in my junior year at a large university and was rooming with 4 other people who I'd met and become friends with in the dorms. We were renting this older 3-story house together that was just a bit off campus. The house was pretty run down and not in great condition, as a lot of college houses tend to be. My friends and I didn't mind though, because the rent was pretty cheap. Splitting it between 5 people made it even cheaper. It was also a very short walk to campus, which was especially nice. This particular night, it was just me in the home, as all of my roommates were going out to bars. I didn't join them because I wasn't really feeling it that night. Mostly, I just didn't enjoy myself at bars. I just wanted a relaxing night. I was up in my room on the 3rd floor, just watching a movie and hanging out on my phone, sometime close to midnight. That was when I began to hear something on the stairs, heading up from the 1st level. There was a loud creaking, and somebody moving around on the 2nd level right below me. Being an old house, you could hear a lot of floorboards creaking when somebody was moving around on a stairway or floor. When my roommates would go out to the bars, when they would come back, they'd normally be talking very loudly, and I would know who was back or not. It was odd to me then that I didn't hear any talking at all. I had always been a bit cautious when I'd hear people downstairs, because our door was usually left unlocked. I got up from my bed to go and see who was in our home. Our house had 2 separate stairways because of how large it was, so I stood at the top of one of them and peered down to see if I could see anybody. Whoever was down there must have heard me moving around upstairs, because they'd stopped walking around and were completely silent. At this point, I had the distinct feeling there was somebody in our home who shouldn't have been there. I didn't want to call out and say anything, and I didn't want to move either. I just sort of stood there, frozen in the hallway, at the top of the stairs. Eventually, after what felt like 5 minutes, the person downstairs started moving again. I heard them begin to ascend the 2nd stairway at the other end of the hall from where I was standing. With the stairway now right in front of me, I felt comfortable enough to stay and see who would emerge from the other stairwell. A man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s emerged and stopped as he saw me at the end of the hall. He quickly called out in a raspy voice and said that he used to live here and he was just checking out the place. I didn't believe him. I told him to leave the house right now, or I was calling the police. That made him angry. He started cussing at me and moving toward me down the hall. I ran down the stairway in front of me quickly and pulled out my phone to call the police. As I was on the phone explaining the situation, I was also playing a scary type ring around the rosy game. I could hear the man's movement based on the noise of the stairs and the floorboards. Every time the man would go up or down one stairway, I would move in the opposite direction. He'd then pause and stop moving. After a couple of times going up and down the 2 staircases and avoiding him, I heard him descend the stairs back to the 1st floor and leave through the back door of the house. The cops showed up shortly after, and I described the man to them. I was informed that they would keep an eye out for him and to call right away if he ever came back. From that point out, my roommates and I did a better job of always making sure the doors were locked at all times. One of my roommates had some cash stolen from his room, but otherwise everything was in order. We lived in that house for the rest of the school year and didn't ever see that man again. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.